Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for coming to our webinar today. We are going to get started here in just a quick second. Let everybody join in. So if you are joining us already, if you wouldn't mind jumping over to the chat and letting us know where you're calling in from. It looks like from our panel, Matt is not in Hawaii. He is in Seattle, so don't let that background fool you. I'm calling in from Michigan, Northern Michigan, and I think, Michael, you're in Seattle also?
I am across Puget Sound in fabulous Bremerton, Washington, which is halfway between a nuclear subbase and the shipyard that fixes nuclear subs. So, you know.
Oh, that's an exciting location to be.
Yeah. Geopolitically, right now, it's very exciting.
Yeah, I would bet.
Smarter to be on a beach.
Yeah,
like
it
Matt
is.
Yeah,
Exactly.
for sure. All right, let me see here. Oh, I've got quite a people, looks like more. Oh, so quite a few people from Washington here. Some more Michigan people. Awesome. All right, well, let's get rolling here. It's about 1:02. So thank you to our today's webinar partner, Critical Insights. Our speakers today are Jake Milstein, Michael Hamilton, and Matt. Matt, I forgot to ask you how to pronounce your last name properly.
Kopf.
Matt Kopf, 20 years within the casino. I'm really excited actually to hear some of your the information that you're going to be sharing today with all of us. So we're going to get right to the presentation here shortly. This session is going to be recorded, and you can always find it on travelwise.com. You will also receive an email within 24 hours of this session that will have a link to the recording in it as well. Two of the learning objectives to take away from this webinar, to gain a better understanding of what to do in-house and what to outsource, and what are the tools that you should be buying for your tribal facility. As always, with all of our webinars, make sure to use that chat box for any questions or comments. We'll all be going through them throughout the presentation, so we can take those whenever they come up. And some plugs for our TravelWise program, a few of the upcoming presentations we have. Best practices in electronic medical records, tribal security with a trusted network, and broadband. And of course, our regional events, which I'm sure most of you have heard about by now. We have a couple coming up. Actually just one. We just finished our Michigan one, which was super fun. And we have Midwest coming up in a couple weeks. And of course, our Cybersecurity Summit as well. So with that, I'm going to turn this train over to you, Jake, so we can get this, this webinar started.
Awesome. Thank you so much. And welcome, everybody. I see we have somebody here from Missoula. I love Missoula, Montana. What a great place. All right. So today, obviously, we're going to talk about cybersecurity priorities and what to outsource, you know, so here's what we're going to do. We're going to talk about the threat landscape. We're going to talk about what to do in-house, what to outsource, and frankly, how to pick vendors. Now, you know, forgive me because, you know, we're sort of honest dealers here, and we, you know, we are a vendor, but we're also going to tell you, you know, how we pick our vendors. Mike and Matt, you know, both of Matt's in the chair at a tribal organization. We agreed not to say which tribal organization because they didn't want to be named as part of this. And and Mike used to be the CISO of the city of Seattle, and so they've both picked vendors. So we'll give you a sense of you know, how to do that. So who are we? Critical Insight defends critical services against cyber attack. And to us, critical services include tribal organizations. They include tribal health organizations, they include tribes, they include tribal casinos, and, you know, critical to the folks who they serve. So as mentioned, we have Mike Hamilton, we have Matt, and we have me. But we went through that already, so we'll move forward. And Mike, you want to talk about today's threat landscape and the headlines that matter most?
Yeah. So all this is recent within, you know, some of this is recent, some of this is a little older, and you may have seen some of these stories before. But the upshot of all of these is that tribal organizations, much like local government and much like hospitals, are critical because of the services they provide. You know, in addition to the money-making operations, there are life safety, life-sustaining, quality of life services that are provided. And on this, at the same time, it's very difficult to be able to hire qualified practitioners to work in the environment. You know, there's a lot of competition for folks that are analysts and risk managers, things like this. Very hard to put a real program together to do all the things that you should be doing. So here's a bunch of hit jobs that have occurred, and casinos are taking a lot of losses right now. And geopolitically, with the uptick in Russian activity, vis-a-vis the sanctions, which are hurting them really badly in their finances, we've always known that there's this loose affiliation between the cyber criminals in the country, and in fact, Eastern Europe writ large, and the government in Russia. Well, now that they are experiencing these sanctions, and they got to make up the money. Well, how are they going to do that? Well, they're going to go steal it. They've been doing it all this time, and now it's much more important for them to bring in, you know, if I just call it revenue, that's really what it is. So there's a whole lot of this stuff going on because of the criticality and the reasonably unprotected nature of organizations that have difficulty in hiring qualified practitioners, buying the right kinds of stuff. Everybody has lots of tools. They're really hard to make work together. That is leading to an increase in the number of incidents like this. And so the last headline there, we're going to spend a little time on this because there is a grant program coming out of the Infrastructure Improvement and Jobs Act, the IIJA. And we've been doing a deep dive into this, and we've done a couple of webinars just specifically on this. But there's a large carve out for rural governments. There's a carve out for tribes, and everybody needs to start getting ready to make that application so that we can start to solve the problems that lead to these headlines. Okay, go ahead, Jake.
Hey, and just a question here as we go. Hey, Matt, you know, I know, you know, you're currently at a tribal organization. You know, when there is a cyber attack at another tribal organization, you know, is it something that comes up? Is it something that, you know, that you know, folks ask you about?
I don't know if they so much ask me about it, but it does tend to come up when, you know, C-level people hear about it. It'll usually filter down as, we heard this happen to, you know, this tribal casino or this casino. What are we doing to protect ourselves in that event? And usually I end up outlining, you know, the numerous different things that we've done and ways that I believe we're covered. I hate to say it that way because I don't like to speak in definitives, but ways that we've attempted to mitigate those risks, to help the C-levels know what's going on, maybe highlight areas where I think things could be made better to see if they want to pursue that.
Yeah. And I'm curious from the audience members, and please use the chat, you know, how often, you know, does it come up for you that, you know, there's an attack somewhere else, either at a non-tribal organization, you know, something as you know, that makes nationwide news, like the Colonial Pipeline attack or the meatpacking plant attack, which, you know, is global. You know, does that come up to you all and people ask you a bunch of questions? You know, Matt, how to when you give those answers, you know, how do folks usually take it? Are they like, all right, that sounds good?
It depends. Usually they're like, yeah, that seems good. Do you need anything else? And then I can launch from there, because we can always use better protection. It always is that way, right? It always is. And it comes up around here 2 to 3 times a year. Sometimes when I talk to people and we're talking about security, and I'm telling them different, oh, I didn't hear about that. Or I didn't hear about that. I'm like, yeah, if you heard half the stuff I hear about, you'd freak out. And I don't hear half as much as you guys do.
That is a truism, though. It's, after working in government organizations in particular, right? Tribal organization is a government organization. When something happens to somebody else that looks like you, everybody's radar goes way up right then.
Yeah.
And
Right.
that is a really good time, as you point out, Matt, to, leverage the ability to make improvements.
Yep.
All right, Mike, I'll move to your next slide. But and just, hey, for audience members, like we were joking before this about death by PowerPoint. Like, I love interrupting Mike and Matt here,
Yes, you do.
and asking questions and stuff. If you have questions, put them in the chat and I'll keep interrupting them. Makes for a more exciting thing than death by PowerPoint.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Mike.
So the point here is everybody running around saying cyber all the time doesn't help anybody. Especially when you're talking about running a business, government organization, agencies, things like that. This is not about perfect security. There's going to be problems, and you need to have that in your mind. So first of all, let me just say that the business outcomes that you're trying to avoid here have nothing to do with scary Russian cyber buffer overflow, SQL injection, and all the other secret handshake language. It has to do with unauthorized disclosure of protected records. That's number one. That costs something. The cleanup costs something. Number two is theft and extortion. Theft through something called business email compromise, where you're just getting fooled into rerouting money. Extortion through denial of service, ransomware, things like this. I'm hoping these are familiar terms, but this is a way of extorting you. And then the third one is just knocking you down to knock you down, which we are starting to see with greater prevalence here. So
Really?
keep focused.
Mike, just to interrupt.
Mhm.
I've actually seen over the last 6 months a whole lot of emails sent to our payroll department. Hey, can you redirect my direct deposit to somewhere else?
Yep.
And they go through the filters because there's nothing really telling in the filters that would mark it as spam or malware, because it's not. It's just an email. And
Does it come from internally?
no.
If it
No,
comes from
it's-
externally and it's spoofed with a username, you need
Right.
to add a DMARC record to your DNS.
Yeah, we've worked on that. And the biggest thing was to get payroll to understand you shouldn't do any of this without actual physical paperwork that you can put your hands on.
Agreed. So
Don't
that
don't
business
deal
email
with this.
compromise, that's what that is. Well,
Yep.
fraud writ large, it's fraud.
Yeah.
Okay. So those are the business outcomes that we're trying to avoid. All right. But here's a good way to think about all this cyber nonsense if you're not part of the secret handshake crowd. Okay. There are two terms to managing risk. One is the likelihood of a bad thing happening, and one is the impact of that thing happening. And you manage the likelihood, you buy down that risk through the application of preventive controls. Okay, this has been going on forever. This is why there's this proliferation of tools, right? Everybody, the next new gizmo that does the security thing, everybody bought that stuff. So we have this huge explosion of tools, but for the most part, preventive controls are pretty well in place. Okay. After you've exhausted all of the possibilities to buy down risk by managing the likelihood of a bad outcome, then you work on minimizing the impact of that outcome, right? So either the help desk cleaned up somebody's workstation, or the FBI called and all of our customer records are for sale online, right? Those are two different impacts, and you get to choose which one of those you want through detection and response. That's how you buy down, that's how you minimize the impact of what is today a foreseeable event. Okay, stuff is gonna happen. All right. And then the third thing to focus on is regulatory and standards compliance for two reasons. Number one, if you're actually regulated, you take credit cards, you handle health records, that's tribes. All right. You have actual regulatory requirements to meet, and there needs to be some programmatic infrastructure there that lets you do that. But even if you are not regulated, there are still business partners, different kinds of vendors, everybody you work with, everybody's going to show everybody else their security papers now, and you have to have security papers. Okay. So just meeting standards of practice. And even if you're not being asked for those things, when you go to get insurance, your insurance company today is going to say, well, if you want a policy, you have to be at least this cyber tall. So insurance companies have become the de facto regulators for everyone. So these are the things from a very abstract point of view, a 30,000 foot level, the way to think about all this cyber stuff, right? Man, buy down the likelihood of a bad outcome by putting preventive controls in place. In fact, go to the next slide. Let's look at the examples of what I mean by that. Okay, so here's prevention and detection and response. Okay, so prevention, yep, firewalls. Everybody got a firewall. Everybody's got email security. Everybody probably got some kind of URL filtering. I hope so. You should be training your users, manage your vulnerabilities. All those are designed to make a bad thing not happen. They will never be perfectly effective. Bad stuff is going to happen. So then you focus on this impact minimization. So you got to monitor your network. If you have stuff in the cloud, you got to know what's going on there. SaaS applications, Office 365 is the simple one to think about, but like Salesforce, other things, need to monitor those. Logs need to be aggregated. Now it's very important to monitor your endpoints, especially because people have become dispersed, right? Because there was a pandemic and people are working from home. So that endpoint now is not inside your network anymore. So monitoring those endpoints is very important. Then you have to have some kind of function to say, we just got an alert. We got to check out, see if this is real, confirm it, and then drop into a response process that's been pre-planned. This is how you buy down risk right here. These are the things you do. You know, Matt, you want to jump onto that or?
No, it's of course you're totally correct. And we're actually in the process of the minimize impact part. We have a lot of this in place, but not, you know, we never have everything in place. We're always working on it. But yeah, good firewalls. To me, firewalls means you should be what are commonly called next generation firewalls.
Yeah.
Because stateful firewalls, just about useless in my personal
Very
opinion.
20th century, yes.
And you have to actually implement it. I can't tell you how many times I've talked to our vendor. We use Palo Alto. I mean, it's a big vendor, and they'll come in and they'll see, oh, you guys are actually doing application filtering and you're doing SSL decryption. They're like, wow, nobody uses everything in the firewall. And I'm like, well, we bought it for that reason. So yes, we are using that. And it has prevented multiple bad things because it's implemented in that way. The problem I've seen with a lot of software we have is they expect the firewall to always be anything inside can go outside. And hackers expect that too. Bad actors do. So we have tried to implement the opposite of that, which is, oh, you want to install this software to do whatever the company needs done. Well, we need to know where it's going to go and what ports and applications it's going to talk on. Otherwise, it's not going to get out. And some vendors don't like that, but it makes me at least feel a little better about it. Yeah, user training is to me probably the holy grail, because the users are going to be the ones to accidentally click on a link, accidentally open something. And so training is really, really important. And training and holding them accountable, you know, basically saying, hey, you have to redo this training like any other HR training every year, or you can't, there's going to be repercussions.
And, you know, and Matt, I'll add one thing there, which is, you know, the entire, you know, country is going through the great resignation right now, where, you know, people are leaving their jobs and, you know, we're seeing turnover more than ever.
Insiders do stuff on purpose.
And, you know, sometimes, right. So sometimes, so you have two things: the people on their way out are creating problems, and then the new people on their way in, you know, don't know. And sometimes people are being hired with fewer qualifications than previously. So, you know, I talked to another organization where they hired somebody in an executive assistant role who had never used O365 before, had never seen Outlook.
Nice.
And so, you know, the user training becomes very important, and monitoring what they're doing becomes very important.
Yeah. And yeah, monitoring at the end stage, like endpoint monitoring, which really goes into, what do they call it now? XDR. Yeah, is a really good way to really get a handle on what the endpoints are doing and seeing, and So implementing a good XDR solution is important. Network monitoring, which is a big thing that I have you guys do, makes me able to sleep at night most nights, because you need really, really smart people to be able to understand what they're seeing on the network, and they need to be there all the time. It's hackers don't do business hours, so they need to be there all the time to see what's going on and to alert you and know whether this is a bad act or something that, oh, we're going to deep dive and, oh, it's not a big deal. We don't need to worry about it.
Yeah, and obviously there are two things at play there. There's and we'll get into this a little bit, but there are the tools that kick off alerts and stuff. And then the question is, when a tool kicks off an alert, who's there to see it?
Right.
And as Matt
3 a.m. on Saturday.
Yeah.
Right. As Matt alluded to, that's one of the things that we do for Matt, is we watch 24/7, and then take action if need be. I'm going to move us forward, and we're going to come back to some of those things in a little bit. Mike, go ahead.
Okay, so what I want to try and get across here is it's not just about buying tools and stuff. Again, everybody's got to show their papers. There may be audits in scope. We have ourselves voluntarily audited against the SSAE 18 standard, right? SOC 2, so that we can give our security papers to people that we're going to be doing business with. They are interested in whether or not we're secure. Well, all the things that go into getting that report happen to be the things that are reflective of just about every regulatory regime there is: HIPAA, PCI, the Criminal Justice Information Standard, the NERC Critical Infrastructure Protection Standards. They all say annually you have to do a risk assessment. You have to train your users and get attestation from your users. You have to do an annual policy review. You need to do an annual tabletop exercise at least, along with your business continuity and your disaster recovery stuff. You need to, especially today, it's super important to do vendor risk management. So all of these are processes that need to be running in your organization. And some of this you do yourself. Some of this, it's really not the best idea to do yourself, not only because of the cost involved in hiring the people and having them on staff to do that. For example, penetration test. Okay, annually, you got to have somebody try and break into your network, right? HIPAA says this, PCI says this, everybody says this. Well, would you hire someone to be on staff to be a penetration tester for that once a year thing? No, of course not. You wouldn't hire a plumber to be on staff. You call them when you need them, right? So some of this, so there's a mix of the things that you need to do and the things that you should hire people to do or bring in, either on a subscription basis or just, as one-offs, things like that. So this, if you're doing it right, these are the things that you're doing, and governance is a big part of that. Governance and how you manage risk, right? Remember the probability of a bad thing, the likelihood of the impact of that thing. When you identify risks, there are a lot of them that you're going to say, we want to accept that risk. Well, if you identified that, you got to put that up the governance food chain and get some heads nodding with you that, yes, we're going to accept that risk to insulate you from, something goes wrong. Well, we all talked about this. So these are a lot of important things, along with what everybody else thinks, which is we just buy a bunch of stuff. Okay. Buying stuff doesn't get you over the line. If you're doing it right, here's what you're doing. Okay. Go to the next slide, Jake.
Okay. And then I have a question for Matt in a little bit. Go ahead, Mike.
Okay. So, this is actually from a consulting engagement I did some time back for a local government, and the distribution of things. What do you do? What do you bring somebody else in to do? Here's a reasonably good list of the things that you can do. So there's the ad hoc stuff that comes up, right? Yesterday, as a matter of fact, we're about to do business with a credit union, and they gave us all of their questionnaire. You got to fill out all the security questions for us, right? Well, we said, here's our SOC 2 report. Is this good enough, right? Access authorization management reviews have to be done quarterly. That's probably something you want to do in-house. You may want a tool for that, right? does everybody still have specific authorization to the assets that they did last quarter? Or did they change jobs internally? And now we got to disable that stuff and re-enable that stuff. And did all that get done properly, right? Again, the governance committee, how you bubble things up, and that needs to go all the way to the board of directors, right? Certain risk elements need to be communicated to the board. Firewall rules got to be, so you can do all these things yourself. And over the course of a year, for a 1,000 user organization, this is a reasonable estimate of the level of effort in terms of internal resource hours for those things. And then if you go to the next slide, Jake, and I'm
And
gonna
wait,
try again.
and
Yep.
before you do, hey Matt, does that track with your with what you feel in your org about the number of hours, or do you think it's higher or lower?
Remember, this is for that's a year of hours.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's about right, actually. Yeah. I basically am I'm the one person security in our whole company. So it would be nice to have another person for some of this stuff. But yes, this seems about right.
And I am curious for folks in the audience and watching, how many people do you have in the seat doing what Matt does? Is it a whole team? Is it one? What do you have? And that'll sort of give us a sense of how to help gear this discussion for you all.
I think for a lot of folks, it's going to be approximately one.
Actually, looking at the chat so far, it is not
Identically
approximately one.
It's identically one.
It is one. Matt, you are not alone, or maybe everybody is alone.
Everybody is alone.
Okay.
Okay, so
Sean started on Monday. Oh man, have fun.
Yeah.
Monday of this week. Go ahead, Mike.
Okay, so kind of finish the thought here. All right, here are I couldn't fit everything on one slide, so I broke it up into two. You can do your risk assessment yourself in a week of effort. You can do that, right? You may want to bring somebody in for that, but it's possible to do. In fact, if you want a spreadsheet that would help facilitate doing a risk assessment against the NIST cybersecurity framework, I'll give you that. Just ask Jake, and then Jake makes me do stuff. Tabletop exercise, you may be able to conduct that yourself, right? There's a methodology there. You may want to outsource that policy. So we're getting into the kind of the gray area here where you may want to do it yourself. You may want to bring somebody else in. Even if you bring somebody else in, you are going to need to put some effort into that as well. A risk assessment isn't done in a vacuum. You're going to be interviewed by somebody, and you're going to have to be there and provide responses. We get down to the end there. Penetration test, awareness training, risk assessment. For this particular jurisdiction that I did this engagement for, this is the way they wanted to slice and dice it. And so there are reasonable numbers for consulting engagements to do the risk assessment along with somebody who's going to put 40 hours into it, to do the awareness training once a year, and to gather the attestations so that you have a record of every employee in the organization. Yes, I've taken the security awareness training. Yes, I understand the content. And yes, I know the location of the organization's policies. So here is a kind of a real, loosely done, but very specific for a certain jurisdiction, how the distribution of what they're going to do internally and what they're going to outsource, and kind of what that costs, both in terms of the internal resource hours and the professional services cost.
And, and in the awareness training, making sure that they know not to pick up that USB stick in the parking lot.
What?
Yeah.
Which
Awareness
always
training
works. It always works.
Always
Our
works.
penetration testers, it always works.
Leaving it in the bathroom is even better.
I want to try it someday. We haven't done that yet, but I'm sure it works. I would personally say always get a penetration test done from the outside, because
Oh yeah, that you have to do for a third party.
Yeah, when I was doing coding, it was always the mistake that I wrote in the software that I couldn't see. And I've just come to understand, networks and Active Directory configurations in the same way. I may not see the mistake that I've made, but when a penetration tester comes in, they have no qualms showing, hey, this is messed up. You missed this, fix this. It's just better to have it done by an outside company.
Yeah, and I think that's true. I was talking to one of our penetration testers, and they were working at a university, and the university had, actually pretty good until you walked into the cafeteria and there was an Ethernet jack and you plugged in, and
Mm.
they and basically because nobody uses Ethernet anymore, they forgot it was there. They forgot it was on. So yeah, I mean, there's always
Yep.
stuff that you forget. Mike.
So, sorry, I lost.
We're going to talk about
I've lost control of my computer.
Well, that's fun.
Yeah. Actually, I was trying to shut down all the notifications coming from Teams and Outlook because they're bugging me. I don't know if they're bugging you. So
they always bug all of us.
Yeah. So this proliferation of tools, right? There's this giant ecosystem of startups and venture capitalists and private equity and all of these things, and everybody wants to feed at this trough. And so historically, what everybody has done is come up with their 3-slide PowerPoint deck describing their magic technology with AI and ML and UEBA and all of this stuff that's going to not only detect everything bad but automate its remediation. That's never going to happen, but we've all been convinced of that. And so people have got all of this stuff, and a lot of it sits on a shelf. So the reason it sits on a shelf is because you buy stuff like that, and despite the claims of we will automate this for you, everything needs to have people associated with the product, right? It's got to be administered, it's got to be operated, right? So tools need to be matched with your ability to do those things, because all of a sudden you find out, hey, we bought this, security information and event management system, but we didn't know we were going to have somebody babysit that all the time and continue to tune it all the time, which is exactly what you have to do with those things. So
yeah,
ideally, your vendor should be there for you more than just to sell you stuff, right? It's good if they really have a mission focus and they're concerned with how secure you are. And optimally, vendors should have some kind of subject matter expertise that you can always lean into.
And wait, let me pause there, and I want to go back
Sure.
to the first thing,
Mhm.
and which is tools must be matched with the ability to administer and operate them. So Matt, when you're looking at tools that need to be operated, how do you decide what to buy and who is going to administer and operate them?
well, unfortunately, I'm the person that's probably going to administer and operate them. So they have to be easy to use because I'm not that smart. So I do a few different things, and it really depends on the tool, right? So for instance, antivirus protection at the endpoint. I did a bunch of research. I in that research tended towards, okay, what is the most, highly thought of in general? Like I would talk to people like Mike and you and find out, hey, where's this going? And then when we were picking out our current antivirus system, I was adamant that we did not want it to be reliant on signatures. To me, that is, again, really old technology. It's not very effective anymore. And so I was constantly looking for, easy to deploy, easy to monitor. It will look for things that do unusual things on the workstation, because that seems to be where it's at, where, bad things are unusual. They're not normal. So that's what I wanted it to look for. And then I started, that narrowed down the field tremendously. And then I did a lot of talking to people like yourself and research online and specialist security forums to see what other professionals were saying about this tool. And we have a couple trusted VARs that sell us stuff, and I tapped them and said, hey, what do you guys think about this company? How are you working with this company? That's kind of the direction I went. Firewalls, very similar way. There's a few really top tier firewalls. And so we played with some of them. We demoed some of them and how easy are they to use? How easy is it to understand? Big thing with firewalls is always you have to be able to troubleshoot it, right? When some traffic isn't moving, everybody's going to blame the firewall. It's become a joke around here. So you have to have a clear, easy way to get the information you need to find the problem and fix the problem, if it's even a problem. And we simply try to choose the leader in that space for that tool. The harder thing sometimes to decide is, do we really need that tool? Is that a tool that we really need, or is it something we should maybe, outsource to someone else? And that's, right now a SIEM might be coming under that, because like Mike said, you have to babysit it all the time. And
All the time.
And I'm one person. I don't have time to do that. And two, a SIEM is really for an analyst. You have to know what you're looking for in order to see what you need to see. And I'm not an analyst. I don't pretend to be an analyst. So our SIEM on site has turned more into logging and compliance. So when an auditor comes on and say, hey, are people changing their passwords? I can pull up a report from my SIEM that says, here's all the passwords that have changed in 90 days, force changed or whatever. And I rely more on you guys to make sure that, because you're getting all the same logs and information that I get, but you have analysts that know, hey, this looks funky. And so that, I don't know if that answers your question, but that's the general line that we.
That was a good answer.
I'd say it does. And I also want to acknowledge Hillary's comment in the chat here, where Hillary says, we choose vendors based on developing long-term partnerships. Support and communication is key.
Absolutely.
Yeah. I mean, Mike, I know, that's a big thing for you, and Matt, I've heard that from you too. How do you decide which vendor is going to actually develop long-term partnerships with you? Clearly any salesperson you ever talk to is going to say, we're here for the long term.
Right. That's a little difficult. Sometimes we'll start off with a small piece of their puzzle and see how things progress. And if we're unhappy, fortunately, I work in an organization where dropping a vendor because we're unhappy is something we will just do. We got no qualms about it. I usually have more. I'm a technical person. I was an admin before I was security, and I still do a lot of admin stuff. So most of the time I don't want to talk to the salesperson. I want to talk to the engineer that can talk at a technical level, because that's going to help me out a lot more to actually understand the product in general. When we are demoing a project, we will intentionally create a problem so that we have to call support, and we will gauge how support deals with us. If we are not thrilled with support, that doesn't help them. But yeah, it is kind of hard to develop that long-term relationship. And sometimes it's developing a relationship with the intermediate company. Like we didn't buy our Palo Altos directly from Palo Alto. We didn't buy our switchgear directly from the company that supplies our switchgear. We buy it through a VAR, and we have slowly developed a really good relationship with a VAR. So if we have a problem with the vendor, they are a big enough reseller of that product that they will go to bat for us to that vendor and tell that vendor, you need to get this straightened out.
Mm-hmm.
So that's a little bit, I mean, that's one way to look at it. It's almost adversarial, going to your vendor to make them, bang the manufacturer on the head or whatever. But that third bullet point right there has everything to do with this. So this business about an ideal customer, this is a thing in business. So I'll just give you an example. Our business, we would never want Lockheed as a customer, right? Lockheed is not in our ideal customer profile. And so if you want a long-term relationship with a service provider, vendor, whatever, there's two things to think about. Number one, the product or the service they're selling to you is called their design target. And that design target is specifically to apply to a certain segment of who they're selling to, right? It's perfect for this size organization in this sector, right? And that's called their ICP, the ideal customer profile. So if you look at a vendor who's selling you a product or a service, and you know something about the rest of their customers, if they look like you, it's a pretty good bet that you're going to have a pretty good relationship there, right? If you're Lockheed and all the rest of their customers are, I don't know, water utilities or something like that, it's not going to work out that well. So this bit about vendors should have products and services that match you as their ideal customer profile, very important.
That's really good, actually.
Yeah.
And, and can confirm. I mean, so I run marketing for the company, and so it is my job and every salesperson's job to know our ideal customer profile. For example, we don't sell to organizations that have 50 IT and security people.
Right.
Typically our Matt is our ideal customer, both because we like him and in philosophy, right? That sort of 1 to 2 person IT security department is what we see the most in our customer base. Mike, I interrupted you.
You always do. So this bit about a reliable pipeline of practitioners. So especially when you're thinking about managed services and professional services, right? The people that have the hot and cold running consultants that they can send out to do penetration testing and awareness testing, things like that, or the sock full of analysts that's watching your network 24/7, 365. A company like that, a company like ours, we own the people problem, right? Because we are that focal point for those qualified practitioners. That means we have to have that reliable pipeline of them. That is very important. So key questions to ask: what's your retention rate for your technical employees? How do you recruit them? Where do they come from? What is your, in terms of a managed service like the one that we provide for Matt, what is your analyst to customer ratio? Things like this. These are really good questions to ask, because you don't want this rotating cast of characters that's always brand new. And in today's world, there's a lot of that going on. It's difficult for organizations to really do this kind of retention when, everybody's quitting their jobs. Everybody wants to work remotely. Everybody wants to go work, move out of cities to rural places, which, hey, knock yourself out. But the ability to hang on to those employees while letting them work wherever they want, got to crack that code, and your vendors need to have cracked that code. They need to have some kind of context and experience with your sector, very important. And finally, and because I'm the CISO here, they got to show the security papers. When we're going to do business with somebody, I get the exam. They come to me and they say, tell us about your security. Well, we have answers for that, also an important differentiator. So here are just a few things to think about when you're choosing, tools, vendors, things like that, and you want that long-term relationship and you want the product to match your capabilities to operate it. Here's some things to think about.
Yeah, and Matt, when you're looking at those things, clearly important, and calling out Hillary wrote again in the chat. I request engineers and support staff on calls as well before we sign contracts. No offense to sales, but it helps to talk to the people doing the work. Yes, that was my yes, not her yes. Like Matt said, all these partnerships can take time, but can be accomplished. Matt, I'm sure you see it the same way.
I agree. Yeah, absolutely. It's always important to talk to the engineers, because they're the ones really, after the sale is done, the salesperson does disappear. I mean, you might still have them on speed dial, but they're not so invested anymore. They've already made the money. It's about getting a hold of the engineer and having a good engineer. I have actually gotten upset with companies where, oh, this engineer moved to a different place in our company. I'm like, oh, so I like that engineer. We worked well together. He answered questions quickly and easily. Yeah. So it is a little frustrating when engineers move around, because you develop a good relationship with them.
Mhm. Totally, absolutely. And Mike brought up the idea of, cybersecurity vendors should have, sector context and experience. Obviously, Matt, you work for a tribal organization. What is there, what do you look for when you're looking for vendors to work with?
A lot of times we'll ask questions a lot like what we asked you. Hey, one, you're local to us, which we tend to prefer local vendors. Have you worked with other tribal entities or entities like us or in our size range? And we'll ask for references. Can we call them? I mean, for CI, that was pretty difficult because of the nature of what you guys do. But for a lot of vendors, it's not a big deal. But those are, a lot of our, those are some of our out of the box questions.
Yeah.
And are there, Matt, other than looking for, reference customers, are there other things that, that, for example, the tribe requires? I know for one of our other customers, which I'll talk about in a second, there was one thing. Anything
there's a couple things that usually definitely get brought up is sovereign immunity. They want, if anything were to go south, that pertains to the contract, that it's going to get resolved locally in a local court. Sometimes that's a sticking point. Oftentimes it's not, but that is one thing the tribe definitely requires. And so we try to make sure whatever vendor we're talking with, they can accommodate that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I have experience with that. You are correct.
And one of our other customers, which I can name because we have a case study with them, is Seattle Indian Health Board. And one of the things that they, so they see Native peoples in Seattle in a clinic, and then if they need, anything really serious, then they go to one of the large hospitals in the area, heart transplant or something big. And so one of the things that they require of us is to be that security in between the clinic and like University of Washington Hospital, because they don't ever want to be seen as a threat, as the threat vector that lets something bad into a large hospital, which is an interesting way to look at that for them. Michelle puts a question in the chat here. Mike and Matt, what are your recommendations for the right number of security staff for a tribe, given the staffing shortage right now? And should anyone in the IT department manage security? Matt, you want to start that? And then Mike.
I mean, that really depends on the size of the tribe and how much users and data they have to deal with. I'm not sure I'm qualified to really answer that. I work in IT. I think I was kind of picked because I was an admin that was always pounding on the desk about doing things securely. And therefore, when it came time to add a security person, they said, well, tag, you're it. And I enjoy security anyway, so that was fine. But I don't think I'm qualified to tell you exactly how many people, but I do think it probably should be a function of IT.
Mike, what do you think?
So the context I have from a while back, a long time ago, when I used, before I worked in the public sector, I was the managing consultant for VeriSign's Global Security. So I was all Fortune corporations. And we would get asked that question all the time. And the answer at the time for an organization that can field their own security group was approximately one professional, one practitioner per 1,000 employees. And that held pretty well for the city of Seattle as well. Although we were short staffed then, they got the message now, and that's about what it is. But that's kind of out the window at this point. Today, because of this dire shortage and the fact that the large enterprises are scarfing everybody up, and now we're competing with Department of Homeland Security for these resources. They're trying to hire them all. The military is trying to hire them all. It's just exacerbating the problem. Plus the Great Resignation. A lot of them are just going, I'm punching out. I made a lot of money. I'm done. So this has really thrown gas on this kind of smoldering fire of we don't have enough people. So honestly, this whole 1 to 1,000 doesn't hold very much anymore, and it's whatever you can do. So in my experience in local governments, which is, a tribe is really a sovereign nation, but size wise, it's like a local government. It's whatever you can get away with, so part of the question was, should IT be working in security? It's just going to happen. You have to have IT. You have to keep the systems alive. You may not be able to attract and or retain somebody who's got, analyst skills to be going through logs and things like that and doing the investigations. That's a really good opportunity to, bring in a managed service for that. I think in most cases, because of the size of most tribal organizations that I'm familiar with, the answer pretty much is 1 to 3. And 3 is kind of on the edge of that for the larger tribal organizations. When you bring the casino operation into it, that's different. There is much more ability to field a team, but from what I've seen, even those teams aren't large. So really, it is this mix of what you can do yourself and what you need budget to bring in for later. And hopefully we'll get to the part here where we're going to talk about bringing in some of that grant money, because
let's do that, and then we'll come back to Gordy put something in the chat that I want to get back to. But Mike, you want to go through Aisha real quick?
Yeah, let's do this real quick. So in the what formerly known as the infrastructure bill, okay, here's the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act. There's $1 billion for cybersecurity controls for state, local, and tribal governments. And interestingly, the text of the act says eligible entities are states and tribes. So there's a little nuance there, because I know that states are going to be adjudicating how this money gets distributed. And I think a tribe may act just like the state in that capacity. So this is a little TBD still, because they haven't sent out the notice of funding opportunity in some of these rules. But there is a large amount of the funds that are dedicated to rural local governments. And that can be a lot of stuff. In our state, and I think in many states, the funds are going to be adjudicated by the state writ large, but really state emergency management, because that is the state equivalent of FEMA at the national level. And FEMA has a lot of experience distributing grants like UASI, the Urban Area Security Initiative, stuff like that. And the state does that as well. So coming through there is the natural route. That said, there will be a committee with the state CIO and or CISO and bringing in people from the private sector to help do the prioritization. Who's going to get what? Now, when you ask for the what, it needs to be justified in some way. So part of the rules that I understand are you have to have some kind of incident response plan as table stakes just to make an application. And then they are going to expect there's been some kind of methodology applied, which they may distribute, but really it's an assessment. If you do a gap analysis against the NIST framework, NIST cybersecurity framework, and go, here's the stuff we got to do better, that's the basis for a justification. So as quickly as possible, that's what's coming with the grant. We can talk more about this later if somebody's interested in a deeper dive in this.
And funny enough, I had a Q&A slide, but hey, that's what we've been doing.
Hey,
I want to get to, so one thing is, yes, so we're helping people write grants if they need that. So my email, thank you, Michelle, my email address is in the chat. And so if you want anything, shoot me an email. Happy to help with that. And so, this is how we see the world, and this is what we provide, which is, it's really cybersecurity as a service. And so Gordy's question is, we also find it useful to know what the vendor's approximate ratio of analysts to customers. Yeah. So we're our goal as a company is to provide services to critical organizations. We are not a giant company where, you're just a number. We keep a, good size SOC for, not a giant number of customers, so that we can keep that analyst to customer ratio right where it should be. And in our consulting engagements, it's one to, you're getting the white glove treatment from the specific consultant. But, when I talk about cybersecurity as a service down the left here, managed detection response for us includes incident preparedness. So helping you build those response plans, doing rapid quarantine preparation, doing tabletop exercises. And then there's the SOC as a service, the 24/7 threat detection investigation, whether you have on-prem networks or a hybrid environment, or whether you're using AWS or Azure, or you need somebody to watch your endpoints. And then we do incident response. We never want to meet anybody that way. I never want to meet you by calling the 800 number on a Saturday night.
No.
But we are now working with insurance companies to, help do incident response work, and that's just not fun. And on the right-hand side is the strategic program development. So these are the things that Mike was talking about before, where, we do VCSO work, we help folks with policy and compliance, other things that you can outsource, penetration testing, social engineering. Social engineering, by the way, our social engineer is amazing. She is phenomenal, and she never fails to get in, usually through the HR department. Usually through the HR department or the marketing department. Never trust your marketing department.
Oh, no. No.
And I run marketing.
Strongly agree.
Marketing and sales are the scariest people.
They'll pick up the phone and talk to anybody.
And click on things.
Totally true. Vulnerability scanning. So for vulnerability scanning, this is an interesting one, because obviously you can do your own vulnerability scanning, but sometimes you don't know what to look for. And so one of the things we provide is expert scan analysis. We walk folks through them, show them what your vulnerability scanning is saying, and sometimes then hand it back to you, but sometimes we'll come back and do it quarterly. And then there's the assessments. So, Mike talked about earlier, if you want to get an annual assessment, or if you need that annual assessment, you can do it yourself, but it might be more cost effective to hand it out. And I love that EM put in the chat, true. I'm assuming that's about being able to trick marketing and sales. Since I work in marketing, hopefully you just meant sales. But that's sort of what we do for organizations. And then I'll put up our email addresses here. You can either use mine, Jake at Critical Insight, or Jake.Milstein at Critical Insight. They both work. And then Mike's is there. One thing I do want to say, though, is in the chat is a survey. And we love getting feedback on our on presentations. And so please click the survey. At the end of the survey, you can either get a gift card, or you can donate the value of your gift card to Girls Who Code, which is a great charity. And as we talk about the shortage of security and IT practitioners, working with an organization like Girls Who Code is a great thing to do. And if you've never worked with them as an org, they're terrific. So please take the survey. The link's in the chat. We deeply recognize the irony of giving you a link to click in the chat in a cybersecurity presentation, but there you go. And then one very last thing is, we talked about security awareness training. We do free security awareness training. And if any of you are interested, shoot me an email, jake@criticalinsight.com, and I'll get you a link to that. Or you can go to our website and click the events tab at the top and sign up. You can send everyone in your org to it for free if you want. And Michelle.
And they won't forget it.
They won't forget it. Mike, as you can tell from this organization, Mike is not boring, and I do it with him. So I keep him from being boring. But I also want to thank Matt for joining us for this. Michelle, thanks, back to you.
Yeah, no, guys, this was really great. I loved all the conversation that we had in the chat. It's always awesome to see that. Yeah, it was great, Matt, to see to have your insight, being in this industry for such a long time. It's really, I love when we can have that on here. It's really important for other tribes to see that as well. So yeah, just like Jake said, if you guys need to reach out to him, you lose his email for some reason, you can always reach out to us. The video will be on our website, and you will also get a copy of it probably tomorrow morning, tomorrow afternoon. So you can find it there also. And I think with that, we are almost out of time. And so thank you to the Critical Insight team for hosting this webinar with us today. And everybody, enjoy your day.
Awesome. Thank you, everybody. And nice
Thank you, everybody. Thanks, Matt.
Thank you.
Good chatting with you.
Yeah, good to talk to you, Mike.
See you later.
Bye, guys.